What do you think about Mattison? Is he somebody that we should be targeting? Do you think that's more of a week one blip?
You could target him, but I think it would probably be more of like an RB3 type of situation, because looking back at the All-22, like, it was right. Like, Pierce saw that Mattison had the hot hand coming out to the start of the game. Like, Zamir White was all right, but he didn't really hit a lot of gaps in terms of like hitting some of the holes when the offensive line was making holes for during the run game. But Mattison had a lot more burst. He looked a lot better than he did last year with the Vikings. So I think that hot hand approach did come into fruition. But the thing is that Zamir White kind of came into himself later on as the game kept going. So it showed that there is still the ability that Zamir White has to be able to run the ball effectively, along with Alexander Mattison. I could see this backfield being more split than possibly like the Chargers situation. I could legitimately see where J.K. Dobbins could become a focal point, and Gus Edwards is still involved in the offense, but I would say it'd probably be like a 65-35% share when it comes to the Chargers. When it comes to the Raiders, I could possibly see it more towards that 60-40, maybe even a little bit less than that, just because there's still the talent that Zamir White had once it came to later into the game. And Alexander Mattison showing that he still has burst, he still has juice, he still has the ability to make contact on certain defenders and still run his feet for that extra yard or two. That's something that Pierce would love to see, that the Raiders, their offensive style, that they want to have tough runs, rugged runs, and just keep fighting and clawing for those extra yards. So they want to be a little bit more run heavy this year. So I could see getting Alexander Mattison. I'm actually going to try to pick him up in some of my leagues, but that's just more of a bench stash than I really would say in terms of, okay, the ties are shifting over to Alexander Mattison. Zamir White is like over.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that gives me the most concern about Mattison and his fantasy value moving forward, I mean, he had 6 targets. So is that going to be something that we can expect on a week in, week out basis? I mean, we were just, oohing and awing over Devon Achane's like usage in the passing game for Miami, and Alexander Mattison only had maybe like a few fewer targets than what Achane had. Is that going to be a week-to-week thing, or is that just more of how the game script wound up going? And if it's going to be, let's say, Zamir White having like 3 or 4 targets, and then Mattison having 3 or 4 targets, and then and to your point, the rushing production is split as you just outlined, is Mattison going to have that same type of fantasy value as he did in week 1? That's where my biggest question lies, is that, all right, so it's good he got in the box, 6 targets, like 4 catches, like 30-ish yards and a touch, so that a lot of his fantasy production in week 1 is buoyed by that pass catching ability. But if we're already concerned about how little Devontae Adams was involved in the passing game, does some of those targets then go to Devontae? Didn't really see much out of Jacoby Myers or Trey Tucker or even Brock Bowers. Let me insert Raiders pass catcher name here. So that's where I'm completely with you in that. Good to pick him up and stash. From a fab perspective, if I'm only putting in, let's say, 1%, 2%, like somewhere in there where I'm not really breaking the bank in order to pick him up and see how this split really unfolds, I think that would be the approach that I would take. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And like when I was looking back at the All-22 as well, like they did share like third down reps. So it's not like a situation where Alexander Mattison is the only running back that's having all the third down reps. And if there's any sort of running back, halfback swings and stuff like that, they're only going to Madison. Like Zamir White was also in that backfield as well, doing the same thing that Alexander Mattison was doing. So it's not like a sense of, all right, we already know that Alexander Mattison is the only pass catching back in this offense. There's a potential for Zamir White to also have these pass catching opportunities as well. I think it just shaked out to where Alexander Mattison was the guy that you saw in the box score that had all the targets, that had some catches as well.